Okay, so this is going to be my session leader assignment over Blankets Chapter 5 and 6. For the summary, in the beginning of Chapter 5, Dave and Julie come to Raina's house, and it seems like they are unexpected. They are Raina's brother-in-law and sister, respectively, Dave and Julie. They tell Raina that they have last-minute plans for the night, and Julie tells Raina that she would be obliged if Raina could watch their baby. Their baby's name is Sarah. And while they're changing Sarah's diaper and waiting for her to fall asleep, Raina tells Craig kind of origin story of how Ben and Laura were adopted, about how it was kind of their way of um, paying gratitude to God for giving them a healthy family. And after that, Craig sees one of the rare pictures of Raina by herself. She gives it to him to keep and says no one will notice that it's gone. After that, Raina's mother returns. She greets the two kids, Craig and Raina, and kind of uninterestedly asks where her husband and Laura and Ben are at. They are currently at church at this time. And Craig and Raina sneak into bed after kind of dodging this awkward small talk session after Dave and Laura return with after Dave and Laura return her parents also returning at the same time. So obviously there's some sort of an awkward dynamic there between the two families, the parents and the kids. And let's see. At the beginning of chapter 6, it starts with a series of flashbacks. The first one being the two boys, Craig and his brother, fighting. And they also begin urinating on one another, which is a pretty comical part of one of the most comical parts of the book, I think. We also see two more flashbacks. The first is Ben, Laura's adoptive brother, getting bullied in school, and Raina coming to his defense, telling the bullies that Ben could absolutely mangle them and to stay off his back and stuff. And then the second flashback is when Craig and his brother are both sexually assaulted by their babysitter. After this flashback, Craig goes to the party with Raina and feels very uncomfortable. And you can see that by when he's offered a beer. He refuses very verbally. And And in the next scene, Raina asks Craig to paint a picture with her. He paints a picture of the two of them gazing lovingly at one another in a tree. And Craig also tells Raina that he loves her in this chapter. For the analysis of this, we can definitely see that Dave is, I think, as I said in my analysis, misogynistic and like an old-fashioned jerk. I would absolutely use different words to describe him, but it may not be appropriate for what I actually want to say. But I think that you have a good idea of what I would like to say. Dave is definitely written about in such a way that we are not supposed to like him. And he doesn't really have much more, if I'm remembering correctly, the rest of the book. He doesn't really have much more of a role to play. But I think that it's giving you a good family dynamic for how Laura and Dave's marriage interact and kind of inherit the unhealthy relationship that she and her father, her father and mother have too. It seems like her dad is a lot, nicer a lot more kind-hearted than Dave, but there's still some very unhealthy things going on with both of their relationships. We can also see the author capitalizes certain words in this. The most notable ones that I thought I saw were Dave's use of the word baby. The author capitalizes that, I think, twice, if not 3 times. And that comes into play later when Raina tells Chris that they refer to their baby, whose name again is Sarah, as just the baby. which is kind of it's almost like the opposite of personification. I'm not even sure if there's a term for that, but it's kind of just turning her into an object. So it shows how little they actually care. And I don't think we see. Oh, we do see Laura. Sorry, not Laura. Julie refer to her as the baby too. Um, let's see. The author also capitalizes words like stunted, overprotective, proud, and power. These are what I consider to be the most notable ones that are capitalized. I think the word stunted is the way he used to describes the way that Reina used to describes Laura and the way that she is developed. Which, since this was written quite a while ago, it's interesting that she uses that language, and I think it's the language holds up pretty well today. Because I think the official term of usage back in the 90s, and I hate this word, but back in the 90s, the word was retarded. That was even like in medical dictionaries and such. So the fact that she uses stunted, if that is indeed the word that she actually used, is pretty forward thinking for her, and it's very appropriate. And like I said, it holds up really well now. Okay, and so that's the word. That's what she means by stunted. Proud and power are both used in the excerpt where Craig says that he um, feels hopeless. Um, when he was young, and he identifies it with being powerless and being hopeless. And Raina says that uses the words proud and power to describe being young, and it talks about. I think she's talking about, like she says, not being aware of her own limitations, which I think we can all kind of relate to, because there was a time when we were all young and we all thought, a series of falsehoods. We all thought that, our parents were like all knowing and all powerful, and that we were told that anything is possible and that we could be whatever we want to be. And we know that that sort of kind of illusion of the American dream is just not true, especially not for everyone, depending on how you grow up and what situation you're born into. I don't know if that's how far into it we were supposed to read, but that's how far I read into it. Um, so when the tree is drawn by Craig, it seems like it's almost, to me, poking fun of a typical romantic novel where there would be some sort of foreshadowing by this tree being drawn, where it would signify that there's going to be a happy ending for these two. Which, if you've read the book, you know that that's not how it is at all. Because, yeah, in the end, Craig and Raina don't even ever end up ever talking again, I don't think, after Craig gets that call from her saying that she can't carry on with the relationship they have, which is much later in the book than this. My response to this is it's hard to like Craig in some of these chapters, at first glance especially. He seems kind of whiny when he talks about how um, he and Raina have developed a routine, and how he gets his like fuel from his negative feelings for his art, and how he's not content with the differences between the way that he and Raina interact by day and night. So I think that comes off as whiny. He goes to the party with Raina and he feels uncomfortable because he's offered a beer. Wishes they could just be alone, and to me that comes off as kind of judgmental. But then again, like, they were also under 21. This is just my personal reaction to it. So they were also under 21, and Craig was quite religious at this time. So it would make sense that he would be uncomfortable with this. But we see that Raina isn't uncomfortable. Then again, she grew up in a vastly different household, in a vastly different uh, city, especially with different friends than Craig. And she's not seriously religious, which is something they also talk about in this. But you do start to have some compassion for Craig when you see how alienated he feels while he's visiting Raina's school specifically. He doesn't seem like the kind of person who would be super stimulated by Confederate flags or cowboy hats, but he still feels uncomfortable when he's away from this kind of like toxic redneck southern, not southern, but toxic redneck environment. Um, he's obviously intelligent and he longs to, be a part of something more than what he has been so far. And when he comes to face with something new, he doesn't know how to handle it because it's all he's ever known. Uh, and when you consider what Craig has been through with the belittlement by his father, it's understandable that it would affect him in a negative way socially. Uh, and to expand upon that, and how I think that we should, even though Craig does come off as whiny at some points and a little bit immature, I think it's important to uh, see that Craig is emotionally stunted by things that he's gone through. Even at a young age, when we talk about the P fight, is what I'm going to refer to it as. Um, he feels, even though it was just two boys having like a bizarre fight. I have a brother too, and we had tons of bizarre fights. I don't think we ever had a P fight specifically, but like it wouldn't surprise me if it's something that I just forgot. Um, he thinks that he sinned and he feels dirty even after showering. Um, and while that is kind of gross, it's very gross actually. It's not something that I view as sinful. It's just a little bit bizarre. His mother didn't even seem like she was, cracking down on them for doing something sinful. He might just have beaten this idea into his head that any sort of trivial disobedience goes in kind of a sinful direction. I also said rationale for his emotional turmoil surfaces, albeit briefly, in Chapter 6 when we learn that Craig and his brother were both sexually assaulted by their babysitter. Um, it's no secret that, like, sexual assault will affect you negatively in so many ways, whether it be socially or for your self-worth or self-esteem, or just by the decisions you make and how you view people, how you view relationships, especially, like, who you trust. That's a huge factor, I think, and it's not really talked about that much beyond when it's first introduced. And that's not really a centerpiece of the novel, so I think that that's acceptable. However, I think that when we're kind of examining Craig's sociality, when we're examining his psyche, we need to keep that in mind because it affects a lot of people and it affects him too. And especially, this is kind of straying from the point, but as a guy, it's still something that's not really talked about for men as much now, not as much as it should be. But back then, it wasn't even on the radar. So I think that we should have compassion for his mental state in that way. And when you couple this with the verbal abuse from his father, the rantings of his intolerant pastor, who told him that he can't even do art to serve God, his constantly being bullied in school, and just being a person who is impoverished, you do have to feel sorry for Craig. And for my questions, which since we don't have a class here, I will do my best to answer briefly myself. Why do you think Julie married the first man who came along? This, I think, is an interesting question because Raina doesn't seem like the kind of person to do that. And they also didn't grow up in a super small town. Like they're more city people and they're more hip and they keep up with, current trends. And the reason I think that's important to note and what makes it a little weird is that I grew up in a small town and like a small conservative town especially, and people do marry, like the first person they meet, like that's the end goal. Is like going to college it's important, but marrying someone right off the bat, especially it seems like for girls, and I'm not a girl, so I can't speak for all women by any means, but it seems like for girls, like there's this intense kind of urgency to get married. So I think that makes it an even better question. Why did she do this with Dave? Dave doesn't seem like he's a sweet guy. He doesn't seem like he's not portrayed in the art as particularly attractive. He has money, sure, which is it means something depending on who you ask. But it also doesn't seem like she has the greatest relationship with her parents. Um, Raina talked about how Laura is not Laura. I keep saying Laura. Julie, her sister Julie, is kind of like a spoiled brat, and so maybe she had a lot of troubles with their parents growing up. Maybe it had something to do with the problems that her parents' marriage had that made her, want to reach out to something where she felt like she could grab stability. We don't really have that much insight on Julie and Dave's relationship, other than they've been married less than a year and are already considering divorce. So I don't have a solid answer for that myself, but I think it's worth talking about. Do you think at this point in Craig's life he's a Christian because he wants to be, or because he was indoctrinated into the belief? For me personally, I think a lot of people at his age who are a part of any religious belief, whether they are Christian or atheist or something entirely different, I think a lot of it has to do with the way they were raised, especially in high school and before high school. But I also think that Craig does his best to do the best that he can. Um, so yeah, I think that it was him being indoctrinated, but um, I also think that Craig. Okay, Craig is a free thinker, but I don't think he allows himself to think when it comes to religion because he's afraid, and I think he believes out of fear. So yeah, indoctrination it is. That's my answer anyway. Your answer may differ. Had Craig's father walked in on the boys when they were peeing on one another, what events do you think would ensue? Okay, so this question came from, I think he says something about like, thank God it was mom who came in that night and found us and not dad. Um, we see that Craig's dad is not the most tolerant of the boys when they are loud or when they have disagreements. So yeah, this would that would have been a bad situation. I don't know the full extent of his punishments, but when he put them in that little room just for fighting, can you imagine what he would have done when when they were peeing on each other? Probably would have been a lot worse. I don't know. I don't have a solid answer, and that's not even that important of a question, but I think it's kind of funny to consider. And finally, what do you think the point of the pee scene was? Well, I think it's comic relief in a part of the story that is becoming a little bit darker, a little bit more emotional. Um, Chapter 5 was somewhat emotional and heavy on the story, kind of low on comic relief, and Chapter 6 is, of course, with the flashbacks of bullying and sexual assault, is a very heavy chapter. So I think, yeah, I would say it was put in there for comic relief. It also, of course, goes to show how, even at the simplest thing, or things that aren't even sinful, Craig feels guilt, and it kind of furthers the narrative about his fragile emotional state. But yeah, I'm gonna say the primary purpose, along with furthering that narrative, was comic relief because it was funny. I thought it was funny. It was gross, but it was funny. Okay, and that is my session leader assignment. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.